Well, the term I use is evolutionary reconstruction, and it's a carefully chosen term. Reform, which is what we think about mostly, is the big corporations and the business community drive the economy,
Mm-hmm.
and then we try to regulate them or pass laws to help out for the poor. The income distribution that they generate is highly unequal, so we try to correct after the fact, or we try to deal with environmental issues after the fact.
Right.
But the system itself produces inequality, excessive growth, pollution. That's how the system is designed.
Right.
Reform is to correct it. I used to work in the House and the Senate. I worked for Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day. And all of the legislation is to try to regulate. Now, revolution, on the other hand, is to overthrow these guys. Take it over. And we know in many cases where that leads, at least in modern history, that it's led to the power to do that requires very strong power, often dictatorial power, or at least strong states. And that's a direction, and in fact, ecological concerns, what we know is not very good from the past experience. Now, the Soviet Union was an underdeveloped country, there was war and so forth, but still, the design is not very good for these concerns. So revolution and reform are not particularly good designs, but that's the traditional option. The term evolutionary reconstruction involves rebuilding institutions like the one in Cleveland from the bottom up, but also doing politics to further that and to get support for it. So, for instance, we drafted a model legislation. What would happen if we, at the national level, began to put significant funding into developing these kinds of institutions? That's only one model, but that's one way of thinking about it. If you build out institutions, building from the ground, walking on two legs is the term I like. Building from the bottom, but also politics in support of building from the bottom at the state level, at the city level, at the national level. There are lots of things you can do to help. For instance, city government buys a lot of things, and it can use its buying power to build these kinds of institutions or support them. State government as well. So it's a process both of institution change, but also using politics. And I think more important, and I know there's a great deal of ethical concern in this particular conference, beginning to generate, and it hasn't been happening, and I think it's very important to inject a serious ethical concern, a moral concern, not simply in we ought to do X or we ought to do Y or it's good to do X. Yes, of course.
Yes.
But do the institutions we're talking about nurture the values that we want as outcomes? And that's a very tough question because usually we don't ask that question. Do they inherently? Or are we trying to paste values on top of institutions that actually are producing other values? So I think that's a critical issue, and it forces you to look at design much more carefully than usual and the processes of building much more carefully than usual.